Oh, hello. Didn't see you there. Welcome, welcome to my tiny little classroom. I'm currently hidden somewhere, tucked off the coast of Nantucket, riding out the storm that is Corona. And I find myself Harry Pottered, it seems, under some stairs, enjoying a book, very leather bound. It smells. I hope you're doing well. What's that you say? You'd like to learn? Oh, of course, dear friend. And Face, what should we teach them today? Ah, yes. What better time to remonstrate on than that of high depression? Why don't we go back in time? Maybe close to 90 years and look at the last time America came to the brink of catastrophe. Except back then, she tipped over. Come along with me. All right, I'm done with that ridiculousness. Anyway, hey, what's up? Good to see you all. If you're in here, I hope you're well. Day 2 coronavirus update. Everything's crazy. Can't group together in more than groups of 10. That's wild. It's almost impossible to go to the grocery without getting chopped in the face by an old lady. I don't know what to do anymore, so I'm just going to teach. It's that easy. Today, we're going to get all the way through the Great Depression. I was thinking how I wanted to do this, both for my purposes and yours. What I figure I'll do is I'll just record it all. I'll get through the Great Depression, post that today. You work through it at your own pace. Tomorrow, I'll post World War II. You work through that at your own pace. I'm also moving the test to the Monday. I know it says Friday in the pacing guide, but we're going to move it to Monday just to make it a little bit easier for everybody. So keep that in mind, and we should be okay, honestly. But I hope y'all are doing well. I really liked your Flipgrid. I found it to be funny. Luke Rogers, especially if you haven't checked his, go check it out. Hilarious. They were all good, and you guys got the gist of it, and we're going to kind of talk about some of that stuff today. So, first period. You guys are a little bit further ahead in the notes. I am going to reiterate the parts that I missed. I didn't really start with 5th because of the whole Corona thing that came down. We spent our time talking about what to do if we went on break like we find ourselves now. So this will be from the part in your notes. I don't remember exactly if it's like part 4 or part 5, but from the beginning to the end of the Great Depression, whichever one is subtitled that. So if you want to go ahead and start flipping, get after it. For me, I don't think current situations are on the brink of a depression. But it is scary, and you can certainly see with the stock market doing what it did yesterday why we are so terrified of financial collapse. And the big reason why, and a good point to make if you ever find yourself in a reading or writing situation where you have to juxtapose the Great Depression to another era, look at right now. We are trying to avoid the brink of collapse, and they were unsuccessful in the 1930s of doing that. And it really becomes an issue. So I'm just going to work through the EQs question by question. This video will probably take close to an hour. Obviously, you have the ability to press play, pause, go backwards. I will link most of my videos onto YouTube, I'm thinking, just because everybody knows how to use YouTube, becomes easier. I heard Miss Alexander got monetized, so hey, if I can get that guap, why not? Give me them ducats. Let's go. All right, so I'm going to share screen now, and we'll get to work. How does that sound, ladies and germs? Come along with me on a glorious and magical day of history. Here we go. Well, there we go. Finally, I'm shared screen. Oh, there's my VIP Kids stuff. Look, I'm very popular. I have lots and lots of children that want to book me. Very fun. I might look down during it. I'm going to keep the camera on me, but I might look down just to kind of get a glimpse at what I need to do. I've got my own notes here, and that's important for me. Really helps out with everything. So don't mind me. It's all going to be good. Here we go. I can't wait. This is so exciting. This is so exciting. Oh, it's behind. All right, Great Depression. These pictures come from Doretha Lang, who is absolutely, unequivocally the photographer of the Great Depression. I forgot to ask. This is so rude of me. Would you guys like a cookie? Do you care if I have one? They're shortbread from the Girl Scouts. I think they're Illuminati, but they're so damn good. Pardon me. All right, so the first question, identify issues the roaring 20s created that would lead to the Great Depression. Well, I think you can sum it up pretty simply. Consumer mentality. The stock market crash is a huge problem. They didn't realize the effect of consumer credit and the stock market buying on margin would create. There's no money left in the market. So when it crashes, it completely crashes and burns. Moving on, identify the issues, the credit issues faced. Again, people are in that consumer mentality, buying things that are not necessary at all. Think about it, not necessary at all, any of these things. Automobiles, appliances, clothes, they had had a whole lifetime without them, but they were fancy and new, and they had some level of status to them. So, of course, they purchase. They do it on credit because they are unable to afford it on their own. And remember, this was a time period very much like our own, if you look at certain people, where people believed I'm only worth what I have, and therefore I must get more in order to have value. It's a problem. Also, the fun times, but that's only in the rich and wealthy elite systems that we see the fun times reigning. All right, so moving on. When you look at this, identify buying on the margin, the impact it had on the US. I want you to tell me the impact. You guys can answer that one. Hit pause real quick, answer that one. Make sure that you're committed to formative assessment. In other words, what I'm saying is, seriously, hit pause. I will explain the correct answer, but I want you to actually engage in your own learning. Be committed to your learning. Hit pause for a second. I'm going to have a sip of coffee while you do. Answer that question. The noted theologian and author, most of you will know him as the author of the Chronicles of Narnia series. C.S. Lewis once said, "You can never find a book too big nor a cup of tea too large for me." And with that in mind, I have a very large cup of coffee because it's important to me, and otherwise I would want to die. All right, so to answer that question, the impact, pretty simple. Buying on margin, I have credit in the stock market. I only have 50 bucks. I want to buy $100 worth of stock. The brokerage firm fronts me the other 50 in addition to the 50 I brought to the table, and they will take the remainder of what I owe out of what I earn. Great system if you're earning, terrible system if you lose. And the impact of that obviously is the massive collection of debt that is going on in this culture. It's a remarkable, remarkable moment in American history where banks' greed know no bounds, and they're taking extreme advantage of all the Americans willing to go after it. Secondly, in a global situation, we were the World Bank for all the countries involved in World War I. They can't pay us back. And it begs the question, what good is debt if when you go to collect, they cannot pay? That's the situation America finds itself in. I asked that question of modern day. China owns about roughly $5 trillion worth of American debt. Well, we can't pay it. We're $23 trillion in debt. Good luck getting that money, China. And when you bankrupt us, you go down too. This is how you set off global depressions. Moving on, the stock market. We already covered that, so we're good. You can look over that if you want more on how the stock market works. President Hoover, for me, good guy, bad president, 100%. One of those guys that had a decent soul, believed in the ability of man to raise themselves up by the bootstraps and to go after things, but also didn't believe in government intervention in an age where government intervention was the only thing to arrest a free fall except the ground, which would kill us. And he refused to be that bungee cord that snaps you back away from mortal doom. It's not his fault that the market crashes. He is obviously a creature of the circumstance around him. I would blame Coolidge and Harding far more than I would Hoover. Hoover's just the guy left holding the potato when the music stops. So when it hits, we have Black Tuesday, we have the crash, we have the massive amounts of debt crawling across our nation. His philosophy is we'll make it. We'll be okay. Everything's fine. Let's just stick around and be together and we'll be okay. What he did, ostrich with the head in the sand, is the example that I go with usually. When an ostrich is fearful, it sticks its head into the ground, tries to ignore it. The 3-year-old pretending that if I can't see you, you can't see me. That's exactly how Hoover approaches the Depression. The poor are looking for help, and they have no ideas on how to get it or how to get out of their danger, and the president offers none. So when you look at the question and it asks his response and describe the resentment he faced, I want you to tell me why Americans would be resentful. Take a second, hit pause, and answer that. Why would Americans be resentful in this scenario? I'm gonna have a cookie while you do. Resentment is always born out of something that we believe is owed to us. We resent people who don't give us enough or don't be considered or aren't considerate enough. The American people resent Hoover because he's the president and his job is to be there for the people. Never mind that the presidency has never interfered in private life in any drastic way before. So he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he didn't. Catch 22 on Hoover there. Very sad for him, but it is what it is. Now, moving forward, looking at this, explain the domino effect and the impact that it has on Americans. Well, we've all seen videos of one domino falling and it makes thousands fall. That's exactly what's going on here. For me, the first domino is the farmer. You read about it yesterday with the Dust Bowl and the response on Flipgrid. The farmer, without a doubt, through the 1920s, and the Dust Bowl is the subsequent result, one of the many dominoes to fall, subsequent result of the bad practices of farming, not to mention the government influence with the new technology. Their price crops, the price of their crops go way down. Farms have to close up. As a result, what ends up happening is food shortages, which means they're more expensive. Also, as the market crashes, they can't afford their luxuries anymore, but they're in debt to their luxuries. I have a car, a washing machine, all sorts of appliances that aren't paid off. They're bought on credit. And that's what's up. It's a problem. All right. Now, banks can't pay out money because it wasn't there. The money in the banks wasn't sitting still. The bankers, the brokerage firms, they were using the money people had entrusted with them to actually create their own wealth on the stock market. So they actually lost people's money twice. Huge problem. And since people can't pay their taxes, schools are shutting down too. Look at this domino. I mean, it's a complete collapse of society. Thankfully, we have many things in place to stop these issues from happening at a full tilt again. If you noticed yesterday, we saw a 12% drop on the Dow Jones and the S&P. After it reaches 8%, they halt the market so it can't go into free fall. So they actually arrest the fall. That didn't exist before. It could fall as far as it wanted. And it was, I think it's estimated in modern terms that on Black Tuesday, the market fell something like 20%. It was a horrifying day in reality for Americans to live through. All right, so when we look at this, the next question is identify the Hoovervilles. I'm just giving you a flyby. Please go back and pause and look at these pictures. I'll go through them again real quick. I'm not going to talk. Again, Doretha Lang, very famous photographer with the migrant mother right here, migrant mother. Massively, massively famous. Unbelievable. Let's put stuff around her so you know migrant mother. Look at the worry, the frustration on her face. I'm also going to draw a mustache because I can't help it. This tool is so cool. Sig Heil. It's a Hitler mustache. All right, so moving forward. Well, there we go. Unemployment lines become unbelievably packed. There's a great movie called Cinderella Man that does a great job of showing what unemployment looked like in the big cities. You should check it out. Russell Crowe, Renee Zellweger. Oh no, this annotation's in the way now. How do I get rid of it? I'm still learning how to use this, guys. You might have to ignore that for the entire time. I will work on it though. Oh, I see. I figured out things. I am so good. You have no idea, guys. I would just like to clear. That would be great. Clear all drawings. Thank you. All right, so next question is about the Hooverville. So identify Hoovervilles and explain how they earned their name. Well, it's pretty obvious. It's little shanty towns that are named after President Hoover. It's sarcasm and only the finest fashion Americans can supply. It's an unbelievable moment where basically people who are unemployed, people who are homeless are living out of their car, as you see in the first picture, or in scrap heaped houses, like the second one, or a tent maybe in the third one. And they're living in close proximity to other people in the same situation. The mailman's going to be here soon, by the way. So if my dog freaks out, I will hit pause real quick so you don't have to listen to her bark. She's real sweet. She's a baby doll, but she hates mailmen, and generally they deliver around 10. So if that happens, it happens. But yeah, Hooverville, so you can kind of get the idea there. I'm going to move on. I'm going to go quick over stuff that isn't as significant, just FYI, to make it easy. And again, feel free to pause wherever you can, wherever you want. All right, so identify the Dust Bowl, why the Dust Bowl happened, and the impact it had on the U.S. I want you guys to answer this one. Hit pause real quick, and based on the readings, I want you to reiterate what basically you said to me on Flipgrid, and go after it, okay? Take a second, hit pause on your side, and answer the question. All right, the vast majority of you, by the way, blamed the government. There were plenty that blamed farmers, and I think that there's no wrong answer because it was an opinion on who was most to blame. We know both; it was shared blame, but most people went with the government because they were pushing ideologies and beliefs on the farmers that were necessary. But I mean, what happens is pretty simple. They don't rest the land. There's no rotation that allows for arable land to basically regrow its nutrients. Crops turn to dust. There's no food to be sent out. Fields are absolutely blown away. It is the #1 weather crisis of the 20th century. And depending on the region you were in, it lasted almost a decade. I mean, they're horrifying pictures. You want to see some? Look at this. I mean, this is ridiculous. By the way, obviously you'll be taking the AP exam May 8th as of now. They are thinking about moving it online. I don't know how that'll work, considering we could barely take one of their practice tests online without there being complications. I don't know how they'll secure the test if kids are having trouble with practice exams. But the bottom picture with the tractor and the dust up against it, for purposes of Madison Southern's final, the final in AP first and fifth period will be this question and that picture. Here's the question. What is this? How do you know? The answer to this question is very simple. You must answer it correctly to get 100. The Dust Bowl, because Hollenbach told me so. I just gave you 100 on your final exam. You can thank me in May if I see you at all, if you ever watch this. All right, so two families during Depression out of the South. You have the migrant farmers. You have unbelievable poverty. You can see the smoke swelling about them. It's a horrifying reality that we have in the South here. Feel free to pause through and go this. Look at this. People tried to make up for it with artisans, with all sorts of different crafts, but it just doesn't work out for them at all. All right, next one up. Explain why FDR is elected president in 1932. Well, one, he's not Hoover. Let's just get that out of the way. Hoover's the man who's been blamed unjustly, but he is the man who's blamed and did nothing. So I guess there is a little justice in the blame. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, won the Democratic Party's nomination for a few reasons. He is a man who is tied to Theodore Roosevelt, both through his own family and also the fact that his wife, Eleanor, is the niece of Teddy. So, yeah, gross incest. He survived polio. He was the governor of New York. He's a no. The Roosevelts are what the Kennedys are today, basically. The Roosevelts of the teens, 20s, and 30s of the 20th century, without a doubt, are like America's political power family, like the Clintons or the Kennedys. His entire campaign was all about relief. He had a 3R plan. He called it relief, reform, and recovery. And those are the 3Rs he went after. And he wanted to do this through helping poor people find money, both through handouts and then also jobs, but also public works programs that would provide those jobs. In other words, enhancing the size of the federal government, creating new jobs where there weren't any. He wins in a landslide. You look at the percentage in the popular vote, it's massive. Here's a look at the electoral map of this. Yeah, that's what we call a butt whooping. 472 to 59 in electoral vote, a 7 million lead in the popular vote. You're talking a massive win for FDR, including your own state. Kentucky votes for FDR. All right, so let's talk about the Roosevelts real quick. They're interesting. The two of them, they're a power team, and you have to think of them that way. All right, you have to think of them that way. FDR is the winning personality. He makes people believe in what he's saying. He makes people basically listen to what he has to say and trust it. Eleanor was the lady who made the role of the first lady actually political. Before Eleanor Roosevelt, the first lady did very little besides host the wives of other dignitaries, or put tea parties together or dinners. Eleanor becomes a political force and actually heads off a lot of different medical issues during the Great Depression. So when you look at the two of them, they're a political partnership, and you want to look at them this way. FDR is the cheerfulness and optimism and confidence. He exudes that everything's going to be all right. And remember, part of a capitalist economy is this. If the people don't believe that it's going to be all right, it's going to collapse. So you need a leader who is exuding confidence in what's coming. It's important. All right. He often was an effective communicator, and he showed this. He did a series on the radio, new invention, also using technology. No different than, I always can make the comparison. FDR using the radio in the 1930s is very akin to Trump using Twitter in our era right now. It's using the mode or medium of the people. He called these fireside chats, 5 to 10 minute lectures from the president, from the Oval Office, discussing what the administration was doing in certain regions to kind of assuage the people into calm. Eleanor, on the other hand, is the eyes and the ears of her husband. She goes after a lot of issues. One of her biggest was the lynching of African Americans, which is technically federally legal at this point, as crazy as that sounds. 1930s, not technically federally illegal to lynch African Americans. Had her own newspaper column. People loved her. Tragically, they did not love each other. FDR was noted for numerous affairs, like on the level of Bill Clinton type of adulterer. Unlike Hillary, Eleanor was a closet lesbian. It's pretty confirmed at this point. Their relationship purely for the political gain, 100%. Moving on. All right, so let's look at it from the next point. We're going to the role or the actions that FDR takes. This is where you want to put a huge star and put down the phrase 100 days, 100 days, the early stages he takes. There's this beautiful thing. You've probably felt it if you've been in a relationship or are in one currently. It's certainly true in a marriage. I can speak to my own issues, even though with my wife at 16, we didn't get married till 20. So we've been together 4 years. But the beginning of a marriage has something called the honeymoon period. And all relationships have this. But it's a basic moment in the relationship where everything that the other person does is cute. Everything that the other person does is so charming and lovely, and it makes me giggle, right? We just can't get enough of them. The butterflies in our stomach when we see them. That goes away. The honeymoon period ends. Presidents have a honeymoon period the same, where the American people are on their side. The only president in American history I can think of, both historically and through my own time, that didn't have a honeymoon period is Donald Trump. And that's because from day one, they've gone after the man. Sometimes justified, other times not so much. But either way, honeymoon periods are a moment, and FDR calls his honeymoon period the 100 days. He figures the American people for 3 months are going to trust everything he does. All right, so I want you to ask yourself a question. If you know you have the implicit trust of the American people as president of the United States for a solid 3.5 months, what are going to be your priorities in that 3.5 months? Take a second, write down what you think. Now, I wish I was here there in the classroom. You were too, so I could actually hear your answers. But I guarantee you got somewhere in this broader theoretical idea of I have to push this boundary as far as I can and expand my power as much as I can to fix this economic depression. Because that's what FDR wants to do. He's thinking of putting down in the first 100 days this grand legislative action. And he pushes Congress to put most of his ideas into practice. This new thing, it's called the New Deal. Massive star next to it. There will definitely be an LEQ and a DBQ and SAQ, something on the New Deal. All right. Promised relief, recovery, and reforms for the American way of life and economics. So what he does in the first 100 days is pretty simple. He closes all the nation's banks to stop panic and large-scale withdrawals. He passes what's known as the Emergency Banking Act and creates the FDIC. The Emergency Banking Act basically backs all the banks back. Instead of letting them collapse and letting our economy collapse, he gives them money to cover and indemnify the people. Now, beyond that, they're going to have to work a little harder. He creates a group known as the Civil Works Administration. He goes after, the Indian Reorganization Act. He begins to help out minorities a little bit. Now, there is some gripe from minorities that FDR did not do enough for African Americans specifically, that most of his stuff was geared towards the white man at the time. I understand that criticism. I certainly also understand his reasons. FDR was not a racist. He wasn't willfully not helping black people in an age of segregation. The vast majority of Americans at the time are white, and the country's in a depression. The only way to deal with that is to get the majority back to work. It is what it is. To call him a racist or to say that he was in favor of segregation, I think, is woke history in that it's completely misguided. So be careful there. All right, so moving forward, here's some of the things the New Deal introduced. So when you look at this, the major groups, you want to get these down. The CCC, 100%. Civil Conservation Corps was all about helping young men, fresh out of high school, maybe out of college, find work. The Agricultural Adjustment Act was very big here in Kentucky. They had to write all the agricultural issues, the decline in crop prices, the issues with the amount of livestock. Remember, the over-farming was still an issue. The AAA by 1932 and 1933 actually was paying farmers to slaughter their herds of cattle because we had so many cows in America, so their herds of pig, because we had so much pork in America, and just burn the carcasses. Personally, I would have liked to have seen that meat donated to the soup kitchens, to the bread lines of homeless people in the cities, but I also understand it. You have to greatly deteriorize the supply if you want demand and price to respond. Some of the others you can hit, obviously, the Industrial Recovery Act. It required businesses to work together. You look at the Public Works Administration, and there's all of these others. This exchange in securities. You've got the Tennessee Valley Authority, also big here along the Tennessee River. We're talking about building dams and hydroelectric things. My hometown, it wasn't technically part of TVA, but it was built out of an extension of TVA, Campbellsville. We have a lake down there, Green River Lake, that we dammed up in the 1940s. So a lot of this region is receiving the benefit of the New Deal. All right, so identify the major issues with the New Deal. Well, honestly, you've got some massive issues. I'm going to have you read Father Charles Coughlin, Huey Long, maybe, as well. There's radical reactions to the New Deal. Some people thought it didn't go far enough. These guys, Huey Long, Father Coughlin, Dr. Townsend, they're socialists through and through. They think that it needs to overhaul capitalism to the point where we don't have a capitalist society. Um, the conservative reaction is that it's a radical break with traditional ideas. Here's the American government instituting rules and regulations on business where we had been laissez-faire. Um, they thought it would drive the country to destruction, and they responded by creating the American Liberty League, a political and activist group that worked against FDR, trying to stop him basically rooting out all the government corruption and all the private waste that we see. And it was a massive tug of war. One side thinks you're not doing well enough. The other one thinks you're doing too much. I want you to take a second. I want you to really consider this. Think about this question. Answer it to yourself. FDR's New Deal. It's a massive expansion of power, both for the executive branch and the legislative branch, and it will be the judicial too, because they have to deal with it. Is it right for the American government to equip itself with this much power? Answer that. Is it right for the American government to equip itself with this much power? I'm responding to text while you think. I have a text from Sunday. Yes, Sunday. It's just that one question in perusal. That's all you need. I'm not trying to overwhelm you guys. I'm trying to make sure you're doing the work, and I can tell based on how you answer. All right. Whatever you said is what you said. That might actually become the Flipgrid question for the day. I don't know. I haven't decided. By the way, I know I asked what you guys thought of Flipgrid. The vast majority were in favor. I had a few people who said they didn't like it, but the majority of people preferred it. And to reiterate, you don't have to put your face on. I just want to hear your ideas. Literally half the time I'm not even watching, other than Luke's because that one was funny. I'm doing this the whole time. I'm just listening to make sure I can hear what you're saying. So it's not an issue for me. Hey, the trucks, the dump trucks here. Not dump truck. I'm an idiot. School's already 3 days out and my brain's turned to mush. The garbage truck's here. It's so cool. I love the crane, how it grabs things. It's amazing. All right, so let's look at some of the leading critics here of the New Deal, and there are plenty. Like I've already said, you can get all these names down if you want and their thoughts. I'd hit pause real quick and hit these. I'm not really going to go into it too much. I do want to make this point that absolutely unequivocally, one of the biggest critics of the New Deal is going to be the courts. FDR hates the courts with all his heart, mostly because they rule most of the New Deal. A lot of his new administration and his new crafted organizations, they rule them unconstitutional, left, right, and center. At the appellate court level, at the Supreme Court level, they're constantly going against him. They said that it gave him too much power, to answer my question from a second ago. We'll talk about that here in a second because there is a question on court packing coming up. So let's move forward. Here we go. Now, the second 100 days are where a lot more of the things that we become more aware of come from. So labor reform is largely going to come through in this area. You'll see it here in a second. But the second 100 days, for me, the big thing to take away is the Relief Appropriations Acts. You need basically it's funding Congress to get more money to the people for working. So the other one is the WPA, the largest peacetime jobs program in history. This would actually help quite a few artists. The government was actually commissioning artists to do work during this time. The WPA was one of the programs that would do it. There were several others. We're actually going to talk about them in a different slide. This is also the beginning of Social Security. Social Security is this idea that people that are 65 or older can pull a pension if they pay taxes into the system. You guys read on that, or you will read on that today in the perusal, the idea of Social Security. And I really want you to pay attention to the mentalities of people receiving it, specifically the guy named Fusco who talks about it. It's an interesting it's an interesting take on whether or not it was a good or bad thing. Moving forward. Now, the true labor reforms. The CIO, the Committee for Industrial Organization, 1935. It's born out of the National Industry Recovery Act passed by the Congress, and it's basically this guaranteed workers the right to form unions and collectively bargain. FDR is a big fan of unions. He believes that a lot of the problems that caused the Great Depression could have been thwarted or stopped based on union control of negotiations and a government that actually protects union rights. All right. Supreme Court rules in one case, the Schechter Poultry Corporation versus the United States, that actually unions don't have much right. The individual worker should be arguing for themselves. But what FDR does is he comes back with the Wagner Act, the NLRA Act, as it's more commonly known. But the Wagner Act is the colloquial term. And what it does is it went on to basically not allow businesses to practice what's called anti-labor behavior. So in other words, they couldn't demand that people not be in the union, or they couldn't threaten to fire you if you joined a union. These were considered anti-labor practices. They wanted, the Wagner Act also allowed the people in the job to decide, to vote on whether or not they wanted to be a part of a labor union. So the CIO is born out of this era as well. It's a breakaway group from the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, that we already talked about. The funny thing is, I took a labor history class in college. By the 1940s, the AFL and the CIO will recombine. They break away. The AFL is still here. CIO is created, but they'll come back together. They won't just become the AFL or the CIO. They become the AFL-CIO labor people. Worse than feminist. I kid. Please don't cancel me. Not yet. I still have a wife and children I have to feed for a little while. Please don't cancel me. I love feminists, especially the blue hairs. You're great. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. There's whatever you want it to be. I don't care. All right. So let's talk re-election then. I know that we're going a lot. At any point, y'all can take a break. You can hit pause, step away. I'm just going to knock it out, so it's there for everybody to have. I think it's the easiest way to do it. So moving forward, and we're making good progress. Heck yeah, we are. All right, so the election of 1936, the question asked pretty simply, describe issues in the outcome. Well, pretty simple. He's not going to lose. He's done so much for the people that trust him. He's gotten jobs for people. He's gotten relief funds, Social Security, unemployment benefits. The problem in 1936 is the economy's not rebounding. It's not responding to all of this. It's like a body has come into the ER with barely a pulse, and they're warming up the shocks. Boom, right? Nothing. They're flatlining. It's a problem. All right. So in the election year, what Roosevelt does to try to get past this is he wants to do the Rural Electrification Act, which is going to provide electricity, running power lines basically, into rural communities like Berea, like Winchester, like where we are. We have a confirmed case of corona in Clark County. Jesus Christ, I'm going to die. Can't wait. It's going to be so fun. If I survive, y'all, can we get a shirt that says I survived Corona 2020? That sounds baller. I'm open to it. Artist out there, get me some sketches. We'll work this out. Maybe we can monetize this. I don't know, 50. Well, not 50-50. I thought of it 60-40, but your work will be appreciated, but brainchild. All right, so back to it. Getting electricity into rural communities. That's what's important, all right? Unemployment is cut in half. Incomes and earnings are up, but the New Deal programs are, I don't know. They're just not cutting into the economic downturn. And it's global, right? Like, put this in perspective. 1936, in Germany, Hitler has rise to the head of the country, and he's basically done it on the back of ostracizing Jews and punishing them, and strict economic downturn. He's told every country that Germany owed debt to, we're not paying it, get over it. And he uses his money to build his army. Every other country is still trying to dig out of debt because they're honoring the system. He just decided to stop playing by the rules. All right, so ultimately, Alf Landon, the guy who runs against FDR, is not a serious threat at all, and that's why you've never heard of him, even though his name is Alf. Great name, by the way. Maybe one of you will name your kid Alf. My next kid, Alf Hollenbach. Right? But bigger news, bigger news. Democrats gain the majority in both houses. They gain enough seats that they have full control. So now FDR, and this is important. This is important to think about. Presidents largely are judged based on what they can get done. And the problem is that a lot of times what they can get done is contingent upon whether or not the House is going to work with them, or the Senate will work with them, or both will work with them. Now FDR, a Democratic president, has a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. Nothing should stand in his way. He should get everything done. All right, so moving forward, 1937 is kind of a crappy year. All right, so it starts in 36, but it bleeds over, all right? And the reason why is because we suffer another economic setback. Look, it's not back to where it was. It was better than it was in 36, but it's still not great. And in 37, there's a crash that takes us almost back to where we began. He also wants to reorganize the nation's courts, and that's going to become a huge talking point in America at this point. All right. The reason why was pretty simple. Roosevelt had a lot of trouble getting the exact versions of what he wanted in the New Deal passed through the courts without them being deemed unconstitutional. So he wants to reorganize the courts in such a way that he can put people on the courts that agree with him. Now, this is the power of the president to nominate justices for the appellate court, for the Supreme Court, for several levels, circuit court. And so this is the power of the president. He's allowed to reorganize courts, but his motivation for doing it is to get compliance out of the courts with his New Deal. All right, so the trouble is two things. The economy is fading, and the optimism in the New Deal is beginning to fade with the American people. They see him trying to push ideas that don't necessarily feel like they're working. All right, so here we go. The court packing plan. The next question is describe and evaluate court packing plan. I'm going to tell you the story. You're going to evaluate this, all right? Here's what ends up happening. Roosevelt's plan is pretty simple. He wants to add new judges and expand the Supreme Court by up to 6 judges. He wants to put more appellate court judges in place. There are currently 8 justices and 1 Supreme Court Chief Justice. So 9 justices total in the Supreme Court. He wanted to add 6, make it 15. You need an odd number so you can always break ties. The Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice of the United States, doesn't vote unless a tie is needed to be broken. And what he wants to do is put 6 judges up. And again, the Constitution states, basically, that the president who is sitting gets to decide the judges. That's why the presidency matters for social issues so much, beyond just their ability to pass laws with Congress. Roosevelt's argument for this was not that he wanted judges who would comply with him, though that was his intent for sure. He argued that the Supreme Court at the time, and this is true, the Supreme Court at the time, with only 9 justices sitting on the bench, turned down 87% of all cases that came to the Supreme Court. In other words, in a year, the Supreme Court would hear 13 cases if 100 were brought to them. And he was arguing we need a more efficient system. We need a system with more justices that can handle the workload so we can hear more cases to rule on our country. I want you to tell me, should the president be allowed to do this? Take a second, hit pause. Should the president be allowed to do this? Supreme Court is his job to nominate, without a doubt. The Constitution doesn't limit the amount of judges on the bench. It just says the president will appoint them. Should Roosevelt be allowed to add 6 judges to the Supreme Court? I'm going to have a cookie again. All right. I don't know. Like, if you're coming to me for an answer, I think my overall answer is no. But it's totally constitutional. And for a government, especially the Supreme Court or an appellate court, to rule that his actions are unconstitutional seems like a conflict of interest to me. He's well within his power. I don't think he's well within his power to expand the size of it without agreement. So the plan doesn't pass, and that was the understanding. They did begin to rule in his favor. So he kind of got his way. He made enough noise that they felt threatened on the Supreme Court, and a lot of the New Deal legislation begins to be ruled constitutional. For instance, the Supreme Court upholds a minimum wage law in Washington state. They fight for the Wagner Act, which allows these labor unions to continue to mobilize and unionize. And Social Security is confirmed as constitutional and has been around ever since. All right, so these next three, you can see them right there in your notes. Identify the intent of the political cartoons. I'm going to pause for 10 seconds on each one. This is your homework today or tomorrow because it's technically due on Wednesday. At some point, I'm going to put up a message board on Google Classroom, and your job is to briefly explain the purpose, the intent of the political cartoons, each one of them. Okay? So I'm going to count to 10 on each one. Here we go. And remember, you can pause and take as long as you want. I don't care. I'm just trying to go after my time. All right, next one. 10 seconds. All right, last one. Here we go. All right, there you go. Moving on. All right, so those are the three. I'll ask you to identify each of them in that order, 1, 2, and 3, the way that they appear. You can pause, go back, look at them as much as you want. All right, so let's talk about that economic downturn that I went after. Let's go for it. Here we go. The question is identify the economic downturn and explain how it impacts FDR. Well, here's what happens. It's the stock market again. We have balanced the stock market. We have put in place guards to keep safe from that collapse we saw in 1929. However, it's still prone to dropping because all it does is measure the confidence of the market, the consumer. And I hope you understand that about the stock market. It's not like some fictitious, mysterious thing that balances and weighs what's going to happen. It's literally just an indication of the confidence, the consumer confidence in a culture. Well, by the end of the year, because of this sharp drop in lack of consumer confidence, 2 million people have lost the job. So all that work FDR did getting people back to work sees an extreme drop in unemployment, or a rise in unemployment and drop in available jobs. He had hoped to cut back, Roosevelt had, FDR, on government spending, but the problem is he basically needs money to run the government. That's what the deficit's talking about right there. The programs are prohibitively expensive. Think of it this way. Things like the civil works, the civil corps, the Corps of Engineers, that sort of thing today, the people who work on roads, well, who pays their bills? Who pays their salary? Who pays their hourly wage? Federal government. And where does the federal government get their money? From us. So in creating jobs, he's actually created massive expenditures for the federal government. We're spending way more money as a federal government than we ever have before. He wants to cut back on government spending, but to do so, it might require him laying off people, and that'll just send the economy deeper down the toilet. So unemployment rises through 37 into 38, and they're trying to help the unemployed spending a ton of money. So Keynes completely, John Maynard Keynes, you should look him up. I believe he's one of your former ID terms, but you should look him up. He argued that deficit spending could provide jobs and stimulate the economy. And the economy did begin to rebound in the summer of 1938. The basic idea is if you just ignore debt and keep spending, it tricks people in what Keynes is saying. It tricks people into thinking that the economy is good because they see the government still spending money, and so they go out and do it. It's deficit spending. You're basically tricking people. It's reverse psychology of a kind economically. Kind of worked a little bit. All right, so now we're going to get into the, well, I don't think it esoteric, but it certainly is. It certainly is esoteric in U.S. history to talk about these people, but we're going to get into it anyway. We're going to have fun with it. Here we go. Identify how FDR begins to change the role of women in government life. Well, the first thing is he's the first president of the United States to ever appoint a cabinet member of his, a secretary to a cabinet post in his administration, Frances Perkins, Secretary of Labor. That's a huge job, by the way, when you consider the time period. He's not putting her in like HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. He's not putting her in like, the Secretary of the Interior, stuff that doesn't matter. He's in the Great Depression. He's all about labor right now, and he puts a woman in charge. It's a massive signal of strength that FDR trusts women and he wants them to advance in our society. It's really good. He's a progressive president in that regard alone. All right. He has his different foreign dignitaries like Ruth Bryan Owen to Denmark. I think the thing is here, women were allowed places in his government, but again, just because he was down with it doesn't mean the society was, and that's the problem of the problems we're still seeing. There's still a heavy level of discrimination. Many men believed that the place of a woman was in the kitchen or at home with the pearls on doing the vacuuming. I didn't say it, ladies. I don't believe it. I mean, you look great when you do it, but kidding. Don't cancel me yet. I still have to feed my family. Obviously, women are equal, if not surpassing, male brain power, in my opinion. And we've got the evidence to show that actually now. But look at what women are facing. They're getting paid less. They have less opportunity. There's hostility in the workplace. This is an era where almost probably every woman experienced some level of sexual harassment. It just wasn't culturally acceptable. So it wasn't that they couldn't talk about it. It's that they just expected it. That someone walks in, hey, sweet cheeks. Like, technically, that's sexual harassment in our definitions today. Back then, pretty normal. Like, go watch Mad Men, 1950s advertisement, New York City, Manhattan. You'll get a good sense of what the expectation was of a woman in the workplace. It was to look cute, loosen a button or two, and basically just be eye candy for the guys. It's kind of deplorable, but it was considered the norm. Yeah. All right, moving on. Here we go. The next one up, evaluate the letter that ER sends to Marian Anderson. I skipped the African Americans. Identify how FDR begins to go after it. Roosevelt, again, just like he was an advocate for women, he's an advocate for African Americans. He gets this weird rap as being, I don't want to say necessarily racist, but not a friend of African Americans. It's just not true. He just had to help the white man more because there's more of them unemployed than anybody else. And it's about getting the economy stimulated. Putting the most people back to work is what stimulates an economy. I don't know. People love to complain. People just love to look at history and make comments and not know what they're talking about. So William Hastie is the first federal judge who's black, appointed by FDR. He did a great job of making sure that he had advocates for the African American society in his cabinet. He literally hired people that were known as the Black Cabinet. You might want to put a star next to that. Basically, they were an advisory team that told the president what the black community was experiencing, what they were facing. And just like the women, despite all his work and all his willingness to be inclusive, the immense amount of discrimination they faced in the 1930s was horrifying. Lynching is a huge problem in the South. The sharecropping African Americans from the South, the tenant farmers, they're not being helped by the New Deal. It's mostly going to white men in the South. And all the Southern Democrats at the state level are doing everything they can to keep African Americans from getting any of the benefit of the New Deal. All right, so Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a letter to a singer named Marian Anderson. All right, so evaluate the letter ER sends to Marian Anderson. I want you to hit pause and I want you to read the letter. Also, if it's blurry or anything goes wrong with the feed, this letter, all you have to do is type in Eleanor Roosevelt letter to singer Marian Anderson on Google. You should be able to find it pretty well. Go ahead, hit pause. I'll make a silly face while you hit pause and read it. All right, now that you're done reading, um, whatever your evaluation is, it's pretty horrifying, right? Like it's nothing worth joking about in any way, shape, or form. Um, I'm going to read the last paragraph and kind of talk about it. The president feels that lynching is a question of education in the states, rallying good citizens and creating public opinion so that the locals themselves will wipe it out. However, if it were done by a northerner, it will have an antagonistic effect. I will talk to him again about the Van Noy's resolution, and we'll try to talk to Senator Burns and get his point of view. I'm deeply troubled about the whole situation, as it seems to be a terrible thing to understand, uh, and to let continue, and feel that one cannot speak out as to his feeling. I think your next step would be to talk to more prominent members of the Senate. My wife just texted me and asked how it's going. I'm going to text her back live and direct. I'll take a picture too. Still going, sweetie. It's fun. They'll hate it. All right. So, my question to you is this: do you agree with what Eleanor Roosevelt's saying here? I want you to evaluate her point of view. She's suggesting that it has to be an issue of education that'll stop lynching, not government intervention. Do you agree with that? Take a second to answer that in your notes. More kids are checking in. I'm going to do this while you do that. All right. Well, whatever you went with, I understand her point. I personally, I don't know. I have a real issue with them sitting back and allowing people to be murdered, and not federally prosecuted for hate crimes. I really do. I understand her point. I think I agree with her point. Honestly, it's a valid one that it looks like intervention. It looks like that, but I can't stand idly by and allow that to happen. I just can't. I have a problem with it. All right, so let's keep moving. Next question. I got to pull them back up. Sorry, I'm looking on my phone. Identify the prominent forms of art in the time period and major leaders. You just get what you need. I think Steinbeck's the biggest thing. You're almost guaranteed to have a Grapes of Wrath quote on this test in a multiple choice form or something. John Steinbeck does a great job of talking about sharecroppers and tenant farmers and having to vacate basic agriculture and go find a new life. Weird ending, real weird ending. Woody Guthrie, great artist of the time, and talking about the average lives of people. I wouldn't consider Doretha Lang a artist of the. She's more a journalist in my mind, but she does really capture the images of the rural poor in the South. But yeah, get down what you need here. I'm moving on. Speaking of Doretha Lang, let's take a minute and look at her. She's worth it. Identify Doretha Lang and explain what impact she had on the time. For me, her visuals are arresting. Migrant Mother is up in my room. You've probably stared at it in a daydream at some point in my class time. The concern, the fear, the worry on a mom's face as her two children are huddled to her breast and to the nape of her neck. Like, it's horrifying, man. She did a good job in her hometown of San Francisco, and then she worked for the Farm Security Administration, one of the New Deal departments. And basically, she was hired by the government to document how bad this was, to help create propaganda in favor of the New Deal. Ultimately, her effectiveness is in so far as how much she was seen. All right, so popular entertainment. Next part, we're just kind of finishing up the little stuff, the roles of movies, radio, sports. Movies were relatively inexpensive, even for the Depression, so people went a lot, and it was an escape, right? Like, I go to movies now to escape my 3-year-old, my 8-year-old always bothering me. I go to movies so I can be left alone. More than anything, I enjoy the stories, but I like going to a movie alone, sitting alone, having a popcorn, having a Coke, and just being alone. And in a lot of ways, that's how Americans in the 30s were. They used the theater as an escape, 2 hours, hour and a half to go away from it. Musicals, comedies, very popular, obviously. The radio was all about news, politics, and religion. Moving on. Sports, baseball, man, just baseball. Boxing's big too. Joe Louis is listed here, but you could also put down what is it? The Bergen, the Bulldog of Bergen. How am I blanking on his name? Anyway, the whole story of the movie Cinderella Man, Russell Crowe, Renee Zellweger, Great Depression boxing had a huge part to play in American hope. Moving on. All right, so evaluate the impact that FDR's New Deal will have on the U.S. Go ahead and do that. You do it. You've run the gamut. You've read the book. I've gotten you onto sources. I've got another FDR source we're going to read later. Just tell me, what do you think the impact of the New Deal is ultimately? Write your answer. All right, so for me, the biggest impact is it completely changes the role the federal government plays in the lives of Americans. The New Deal represents a shift in at least executive power, if not federal power, a shift away from a non-interventionist point of view from the government towards the people into the government is here to provide goods and sometimes even the services that are needed to survive. Relief programs put out billions of dollars, right? It doesn't necessarily stimulate economic recovery, but the reforms did put people to work. It gave people something to be prideful of, and it gave them the assistance they needed to ride out the storm. It changed forever the link between the American government and its people. Now, think about today. We're in the midst of a coronavirus where literally everyone's tuned in with bated breath to see what Donald Trump has to say at like 8 o'clock every night. And we're waiting for Dr. Fauci, who's the head of the Infectious Disease Center at the CDC, has to say about, its growth. We're constantly looking to federal officials for answers, for solutions. The 1920s and earlier, Americans looked to themselves to solve their problems. Now we look to Washington. And I don't know if that's a good idea. Is what it is. I can't do anything about it now. Further impacts, I would kind of talk about this: relief, recovery, reform. Make sure you get these down, that you just understand it. What we're talking about when we mean relief, recovery, reform. Pause, take this down. I've talked about it at length, but I think this is a good summary of it. I lost my place. Get that down. I love the name of the new section, by the way. We're getting ready to launch into World War II after this. World War II, more worldier, more warrior, much wow. All right, the limits. The question asked, using that was the one before. Describe the limits on FDR's New Deal and identify those often left out. Well, the limits are pretty simple. They're not meant to be permanent solutions. So the limit of the New Deal is it was a temporary solution to a problem that stuck around for a decade, almost permanent. And it didn't provide jobs for everybody. So while it put a dent in unemployment, it didn't do away with unemployment. Obviously, the level of government assistance required, it varied state to state depending on severity of need. So like the example here is a good one. Family needing assistance in Massachusetts might receive $60 a month because the cost of living is higher, whereas a family in Arkansas might only get $8 a month. So they would argue it's equity. The New Deal government would argue that it's equity. I would argue that people don't care about equity. They care about equality because they want to feel like they're equal. But equity is actually what makes the system worth living in. And then last but not least, the New Deal did discriminate. There's no way around it. Was it hateful? Was it intentional? No. FDR did not hate Hispanics. He did not hate African Americans. He did not hate women. But his system allowed government officials and biased people in states in the South to do just that. So it was unintentional, but there's still discrimination in the New Deal. And the white man, yet again, that sumbitch, he's the winner. Problem, right? Always a problem. The mailman might be here. I don't know. The dog just perked up. I'm waiting for her to bark. Can I make it to the end class? Can I make it, guys, without the mailman showing up? because she's loud. She barks super loud. And I'll hit pause for you, but you'll hear it for a second or two. And if you're in headphones, you're going to be throwing those things across the room. I'm here to tell you. Yeehaw, let's go. All right, so the end of the New Deal. Let's talk about it. So FDR's 1938 policies, they're basically based on the idea that there's weakening support in America for the New Deal. The economic downturn of 1937 emboldens, and remember, 1937 is the primaries for a midterm election in 1938. A group of anti-New Deal senators, mostly Republicans, are in opposition, and they're making a hard push for the House and the Senate. You look at 1938, he had a tough year. Only one piece of New Deal legislation passed, the Fair Labor Standards Act minimum wage. So in 1938, when the elections hit, Republicans made gains in both houses, and now FDR has no congressional support to pass laws. So we mark historically the end of the New Deal, that midterm election in 1938. And FDR gets super lucky because if Hitler wasn't being all uppity throughout the Sudetenland and the Rhineland, well, FDR would have been a failed president in some ways and a well-received one in others, and just kind of a middle of the road. But Sig Heil, old Adolf, he's about to make the whole world turn on its ear. I don't know what else to say about it other than hold on to your butts. Yeah, you can just add this, read it on your own, hit pause if you want it. I think this is a good breakdown of all the different relief programs that come through, and it breaks it down based on relief, recovery, reform. I really do want you to use that mentality, 3 R's, the alliteration, relief, reform, recovery. Get them in your heads. Get them in your heads and tie some of the things that happen to it so that you can actually talk about it with a level of understanding. You've got to talk TVA. You've got to be able to talk AAA with the agricultural adjustment. Works progress, you got to know. You got to know the Wagner Act. Those are things, it's big. I love this graph, and this will be the last thing that I do before we go. This gives you a great visual of what I'm talking about, the New Deal and that recession in 1938 and what it does. I mean, we're trash. We're absolute trash. Look at where we are in 1942 comparative to the stock market crash. We've gone all the way back. The world is at war. It's a pandemic of fear, not corona, but you can see what pandemics of any kind do to people. The fear gets people to an all-time low. And not until we entered the war, technically we entered the war 1941 on December 8th after Pearl Harbor, but we don't actually employ or deploy people till 42. Then we're going to turn our entire economy into a wartime economy, and nothing makes an economy bounce back like all hands on deck to fight a war. All right, so ultimately, I don't know what to tell you about FDR. Make up your own opinion. I think the facts speak for themselves, and your opinion will be pretty obvious and probably pretty close to mine. All right, well, I bid you all adieu. The next time you see me, to war. Bye, everyone. I hope you have a great day. Don't get corona, and if you do, don't breathe on people.